What's up there, Workforce? Chris here with Work To Game, and it is time for a dungeon guide. Now, we are going to start to upload a lot more dungeon guides with the goal of eventually having all the dungeons and trials and so on right here on Work To Game. And so I do want to first thank the people who have made that kind of expansion to our content possible, our Patrons. If you'd like to be considered becoming one, try clicking on the link in the description below. Thank you guys so much. You are fantastic. Now let's jump in. I do want to have a precursor to this. This is for Sastasha. So as we talk about Sastasha, Halatali, Tamtar, Deepcroft, we're talking about the beginning dungeons in the game. So I am assuming that you are coming to this guide with no knowledge. If you have knowledge of MMOs or even knowledge of Final Fantasy XIV, that's great. This guide is going to be having a lot of moments where I stop and I talk about basic concepts of dungeons under the assumption that if you're looking for a guide on one of these dungeons, you probably haven't seen very much dungeon content in the past. So if any of this is new to you, great. If not, just keep watching through the guide. I'll tell you all the bosses. They're pretty straightforward. Let's jump in. Just wanna feel like this. Just wanna feel like this forever. Starting off the dungeon, the first thing you're going to want to look for is anybody watching the opening cutscene? If they are watching the opening cutscene, there's a very good chance that this is either the first time here or one of their first times here. You're also going to want to look for the returner icon or the new player icon. That is either a flower budding, so there is no little flower on top, or a flower is on top, which means that they are within their first 45 days of the game or their first 45 days after some amount of time off, which means that maybe this is all just coming back to them. Another thing to look at is, do they have a job? So the fact that we see a thaumaturge icon here instead of a black mage tells us that they have not played past level 30 and done that class quest, so we do need to be careful with the pacing. So as I pull these off, we can talk about big pulls, mass pulls, where you pull a bunch of stuff at once without damaging it, and chain pulls. These are basic tanking concepts, and I am going to be doing a lot of what's called chain pulling in this dungeon, and it's a question of what can my healer handle. The way you check that is you look first at their mana and see if it's even possible, and also by just kind of feeling out the waters. So I'm trying a double pull here, and they handle this. I do have to pop a few cooldowns, so that tells me that if I do too big a pulls in the rest of the dungeon, they probably won't be able to keep me up, regardless of the fact that I'm synced down and have way too high of gear for this. But ultimately, it's just what they're comfortable with. So it's about meeting a pace for your group. I am doing all of my dungeon guides that I've recorded today, mostly with Duty Finder people, and so the ones I'm recording today, these are all a really honest representation of just the random people you get with. So when you run with friends, this dungeon is much easier. Now what I did there is I actually clicked on a note, and that note told me the color. So as we clear through the rest of this, keep in mind that those clams can only be damaged while they're open. I know to go to the red coral because it said red, R-E-D-D, I believe, at the end of the note. And so sometimes it says green, sometimes it says blue, and once everybody's in, I make sure they're not watching the cutscene, I'll click on the inconspicuous switch, and the chopper will appear. If you get it wrong, I think it just spawns an ad. Been a long time since I got it wrong. And basically you stay in here, and right around the time that the gate locks will be the first time he tosses down AoE, so about 15 seconds in, and every give or so, 15-20 seconds after that, he's going to toss down an AoE. Just don't stand in that. It's your first concept of just don't stand in bad. This game is incredibly good at showing ground effects that you shouldn't be standing in. Just pay attention to those. Now we do a small amount of trash pulls. Trash is the stuff between bosses, and we're going to get ourselves into the next boss. So the next boss here is going to be a multi-pull, and so I am going to actually mark my target. I have that bound to Shift A on my keyboard, and I'm going to mark the Reavers first because they die easier, and then I'm going to move to Madison. Sometimes you mark casters because they're going to put out deadly stuff. Sometimes you just mark something so that we're focusing something, which is what I'm going to do in this next phase, where I do what's called chain pulling. Chain pulling is where you don't wait at all between pulls, and actually sometimes even slightly overlap. So basically every time we drop below 3 living mobs, as long as everybody's full on mana and I have enough TP to maintain the pulling so that I'm not losing threat, aggro, hate, whatever you want to call it, the fact that I'm the tank and they're all looking at me, I'm going to go ahead and keep pulling. Now in this room you do want to be careful as I go ahead and select this Reaver next. Instead of tab targeting, I do want to pull him directly, and I toss my tomahawk at him, and I want to be very aware that I'm not line of sighting my healer. Line of sight means that their spells can actually get to me. If I line of sight them, meaning I go out of line of sight, that's why they call it the term line of sighting, then I won't be healable and I may go down. Now I'll pull those guys over there, they'll drop a key to that door, and I'm going to pull these guys because we're going to have to kill them in a little bit, so let's just keep that pull going. Now we go into the captain's quarters with the key we just found on the ground, and we're going to have to kill this big Reaver, who's going to drop a key to the door that we cleared second. So as soon as he goes down, hard to get a camera angle that's nice here, because as a tank you always want to face all bosses and mini-bosses away from the party in case they have what's called a cleave, where their attacks go out and hit anybody in front of them, not just the tank. So always face their back to the party. That's just good tanking etiquette. Now we'll run down here and you'll notice that we'll just keep chasing the same guy throughout this, and we fight him yet again. This time he's got his reavers. We're going to burn those first, and then that door over in the distance is actually going to open up, at which point he's going to release some dogs. It doesn't matter if you kill him first or the dogs. Most parties tend to focus the dogs first. A lot of times with bosses, if you focus the boss, the ads will disappear. I don't believe this is one of those cases, but the final boss in this dungeon definitely is, so just keep that in mind. Now we're going to want to pull this room, and the thing to keep in mind here is if we want to stay to the left, there's no reason to pull more than we have to. The big experience gains from dungeons is from running dungeons exactly your level, but since everybody here except one guy is synced, the biggest experience you can get across the board is that completion experience for your first dungeon of the day. So it's about completing quickly. I'm going to go ahead and pull the boss. They're a little slow to trickle in, but after 15 seconds they'll be pulled in anyway, and this is just a slow DPS burn. So I will go ahead and just pull this, and then this guy has some mechanics that go on, but nothing that you need to worry about at this point. Just keep focusing the boss. This party keeps killing ads, and all that does is make it slower. Just focus the boss, focus the boss, focus the boss, and all of his ads will despawn as soon as he goes down. So I, as the tank, will pull them just so they're not pecking at my healer. No reason to add stress to him since he seemed to be a little on the less experienced side. So you do want to give etiquette to anybody in your party that maybe seems a little less experienced than you. Offer them advice if they have questions, anything like that. I'm actually typing in chat during this fight, just focus boss. This is a boss that we don't have to worry about the ads. I mark him. I do everything I can to try to teach them how to run this dungeon efficiently moving forward. As soon as the boss goes down, everybody gets their experience. They go into their cutscenes. I can toss out my commendation. I can pick out my loot, and I can call it a day. And that is Sastasha. So I went over a lot of concepts there. If any of those are new or I touched on them too quickly, go ahead and let us know in the comments below. We'd be happy to expand on them there, or maybe make a separate video for introducing you just to the concepts of tanking or healing. That dungeon in particular is very easy on the healer. You actually have time to sometimes toss out some DPS if you're comfortable. So it's just mostly just keep us up, and the tank sets the pace of the dungeon. So as long as your tank is being respectful of your abilities to heal, you should be absolutely fine. Just focusing on who you can. It's nothing too crazy. And as a DPS, just don't stand in the things that appear on the ground. If they mark a target, focus the target. Otherwise, there's really nothing too crazy in this dungeon, as it is the first dungeon and it's an introduction to the 4-man content that really sets the tone for a large portion of what this game is in in-game. Dungeons get quite a bit more complex from here, so each dungeon they're going to layer on a little more, and so, you know, if you have any questions, it's good to ask along the way. Now, I'm going to be releasing every single dungeon eventually. That is the plan, but as you guys know with some of our other guide series that are incomplete in the moment, some of the dungeons may be a long way off. So if you have any questions about a particular dungeon, definitely let us know in the comments below, and we'll see if we can either answer that or push that video higher up our list. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is Chris with Work To Game. I'll see you next time. Hey you, especially if you're a new face, welcome to the workforce. If you want to hit that subscribe button to say you like us, we'd really appreciate it. But there's a little bell next to it if you really like a channel, and you can go ahead and hit that if you'd like to be notified. Be sure that if that thing lets you know, hey, do you always want to be notified, or you just sometimes want to be notified, that you tell it, oh man, I actually meant by notified, notified. So why don't you give that a click, and we hope to see you around in our next video.